The tiny green camera light blinked from the bookshelf as I walked into my house. My sons had sold everything while I was in the hospital. Still, I didn't scream, just set my bag down on the floor where my mother's chair used to be. As the light kept blinking, steady and slow, it felt like the room itself was watching with me. While it flickered, I thought of Liam's hand in mine last week, telling the nurse he'd handle my estate. The same boys I carried in my arms had cleared me out like a stranger. That's when I smiled because they didn't know the house was wired and I never left it empty. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The hospital discharged me just before noon. The sky over Spokane a flat, wintry gray that made everything look a little more tired than it should. 11 days after my hip replacement, I moved slower than I liked, but I was ready to be home, ready for my own sheets, my own kitchen, my own quiet. Claire had offered to pick me up, but Neil insisted. "We got it handled, Mom," he'd said, and because it was easier than arguing, I let him. He and Darla were already waiting on my porch when the shuttle dropped me off. They looked almost rehearsed, standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling too brightly. Darla's scarf fluttered like she'd walked out of a commercial for cheerful family living. "There she is," Neil announced, reaching for my overnight bag before I could even get a hand on it. "We really freshened things up for you, Mom." Freshened. A strange word choice. I tucked it away. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Not visually, not at first, but in the way a room changes after someone breathes in it too long. A wrongness in the air. It wasn't until I reached the living room that I saw it clearly. My recliner, the one my husband bought me for our 20th anniversary, was gone. In its place sat a beige, generic-looking thing that a motel would reject. The antique hutch that held my wedding china missing. And above the fireplace where the oil painting Richard had surprised me with on our last road trip should have been, hung a print of wildflowers so bland it almost offended me. "Oh," I said softly. Darla's voice chimed in behind me. "Looks nice, right? Just felt like time to declutter a little." That old stuff was weighing the room down. Weighing it down. My pulse thudded once in my ears, sharp and hot. I touched the back of the unfamiliar chair, running my fingers along the cheap stitching. I didn't trust myself to speak yet, so I didn't. Neil clapped his hands together like he'd completed a chore. "And don't worry, Mom, everything's been handled. You can just rest." Rest. Another carefully chosen word, too careful. I walked the first floor slowly, letting them chatter behind me about airflow and future planning and making the place safer. Every few steps, something else was missing. The carved wooden chest in the hallway, the little table from the foyer that Richard had refinished himself. Even the rug under the dining table looked different, thinner, cheaper. I didn't ask where anything went. I didn't ask why. By the time I reached my bedroom, Neil was talking about grabbing groceries for me later. Darla nodded like she'd had a hand in the plan. I thanked them with the calmest voice I could manage and told them I needed to lie down. They left quickly, eager to avoid the quiet settling between us. Once their car pulled away, I closed my bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed. It took a moment to breathe past the tightness in my chest. Loss doesn't always come with funerals. Sometimes it's delivered by your own children with cheerful voices and a key to your house. My hip throbbed, my heart did worse. I lay back and closed my eyes for a few minutes, listening to the creaks of my home, my altered home, adjusting to the silence. I wasn't angry yet. Anger is loud. What I felt was colder, slower, something that curled inward and took notes. When the pain medication wore off enough to let my head clear, I slid my feet into slippers and shuffled into the kitchen. Every cabinet handle felt unfamiliar under my fingers. I heated a small bowl of soup, ate half, and washed the dish by hand, more for the rhythm than the cleanliness. At 8:30, I turned off the lights and went to my room. Anyone watching would have assumed exhaustion carried me there. Anyone listening would have thought I needed sleep. But sleep wasn't coming. At 11:45 p.m., precise, deliberate, I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out my iPad. The screen glow lit the room in a faded blue as I tapped open the security app Richard installed years ago, back when his hands still worked well enough to hold tools. One by one, each camera feed blinked to life. Living room. Hallway. Kitchen. Back entry. Garage. All with tiny green dots in the corner. All steady. All recording. I sat back against my pillows, the stillness of the house stretching around me like an exhale. Freshen things up, I murmured. Then I pressed play. The video loaded with a soft click, and for a moment all I heard was the faint hum of my bedroom heater. Then the footage sprang to life, dated 3 days into my hospital stay, 2:17 p.m., bright daylight slicing through my living room windows. Neil let himself in first. No knock, no hesitation, just walked in like the house had been waiting for him. He wore that old windbreaker he never washed, the one that always smelled faintly of gasoline. Behind him, Darla followed with a travel mug in one hand and her phone in the other, her voice already rising as she narrated something to someone who clearly wasn't me. They didn't know the camera above the bookshelf caught everything. It's even dustier than last time, Darla said, tapping her mug onto my side table like it belonged there. Don't start, Neil muttered, heading straight for the hutch. We just need to get through the big stuff. That credenza's worth something, she won't even notice it's gone. My fingers tightened around the iPad. He didn't even use the right word, hutch, not credenza, and still he thought he knew its value. In the footage, Darla wandered toward my recliner, nudging it with her shoe like it offended her. We should have tossed this ages ago. I told you sentimental things just take up space. Help me with the boxes, Neil said. I watched them toss aside cardboard, bubble wrap, even a family album I kept behind the hutch flipped open, pages bending as it hit the floor. They didn't pause. They didn't hesitate. They just kept moving, picking up pieces of my life and assigning them prices like they were at a yard sale. At one point, Darla held up the oil painting Richard gave me. She squinted at the signature, shrugged, and set it down with far less care than it deserved. Looks vintage, she said. Someone will buy it. I paused the video there. Not because I couldn't keep watching, but because something old and sharp pressed against my ribs, not grief, not yet. It was the knowledge that this wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't a mistake. My children had made a decision. I took a long breath, the air in the room feeling colder than before. Then I reached for a pen and a small notepad from my nightstand, the one I used to balance accounts back when numbers made up most of my days. Time, date, item, condition. Their words, their actions. I cataloged it all as neatly as I had ever tracked a client's books, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. By the time the sun crept through my blinds, I'd filled 3 pages. My hip ached, my back protested, but my mind flowed clear and uncluttered. Order had always been my refuge. Around 9 a.m., after a shower and a slow shuffle to the kitchen for tea, I sat down at the table, still bare where the centerpiece used to be, and dialed Walter Griggs from Griggs & Sons Antiques. I kept my tone light, curious, harmless. Walter, good morning. I'm looking for a few pieces, thought I might see what you've got in stock. He recognized my voice immediately. We'd sold Richard's watch collection through him years ago. Maggie, you doing all right? I'm getting there, I said, choosing each word carefully. I'm mostly checking on styles, maybe browsing. Well, you know you're welcome anytime, he said warmly. Then his voice shifted, an edge of something thoughtful sliding in. Funny thing, your son brought in some of those pieces last week. I assumed you were downsizing. For a heartbeat, everything in me went still. Not surprised. Just steadier. I kept my voice neutral. Did he? Oh yes, the hutch, that lovely carved chest, even that old recliner with the brass studs, shame to part with it, but he said you were clearing out. He kept talking, unaware of the way those words landed like a quiet verdict. I let him finish, thanked him, and promised I'd drop by soon. When I ended the call, the house around me seemed even emptier than the night before, not because of what was gone, but because of what had been revealed. I walked to the living room and stood where my recliner should have been. Sunlight fell across the cheap replacement chair, casting its dull fabric in a glow it didn't deserve. For the first time since walking through the door yesterday, I let the anger rise. Not loud, not messy, just steady, like water heating toward a boil. They thought they were doing this quietly. They thought they were doing this unseen. I glanced toward the camera above the bookshelf. Oh, how wrong they were. And I wasn't anywhere near finished pressing play. Nadine arrived just after 10 the next morning, her heels clicking with the sharp, efficient rhythm of a woman who never wasted time. She stepped inside and took one slow look around my living room, the bare patches on the wall, the mismatched furniture, the empty spaces where entire parts of why life used to sit. Her eyebrows lifted just barely. You weren't exaggerating. I rarely do, I said. She set her briefcase on the coffee table, another new, cheap replacement, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Walk me through it. So we did. Room by room. In the dining area, she circled the outline on the floor where the old rug had been, scribbling neat notes in her compact handwriting. In the hallway, she paused at the blank spot under the family photos. Chest missing, she murmured, writing it down before I even needed to say it. When we reached my bedroom, she stopped entirely. The emptiness was louder in here, the missing mirror, the antique nightstand replaced with a wobbling laminate box, the absence of the quilt chest at the foot of the bed. They took more than I expected, she said quietly. I know, I replied, my voice steady. Back in the living room, I opened the iPad and pulled up the footage. I didn't narrate anything, just let the video speak. The moment Neil tossed aside the album, Nadine's jaw tightened. She finished watching the segment, clicked the screen dark, and nodded once. That's actionable, she said simply, not dramatic, not surprised, just a fact delivered the way a surgeon delivers a diagnosis. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Neil lit the screen. Hope you're settling back in. We're here to help downsize when you're ready. I didn't respond. Nadine saw the preview and didn't comment. She didn't need to. We both knew what the message really meant. Instead, I turned the iPad back on and opened the file I'd started the night before, the itemized list, each line marked with the timestamp and cross-referenced with Walter's estimates. Nadine skimmed the first page. You were an accountant too long, she said, almost smiling. Long enough, I replied. She reviewed my numbers, adding her initials next to each valuation. Accuracy matters, judges like accuracy. When she left, the house felt colder again, but not empty this time, more like a ledger that had finally been opened. I took a breath, logged into my bank's portal, and froze the joint emergency account Neil still had access to from when Richard was ill. A single tap, simple, quiet. Then I moved to the county small claims website, uploaded the documents, paid the filing fee, and clicked Submit. The confirmation email popped up seconds later. Just like that, the first stone in the avalanche had been placed. Around noon, I heard Claire's soft knock and opened the door to see her standing there with a grocery bag and concern written straight across her face. Hi, Nana, she said, stepping inside. Almost immediately, her eyes darted around, brow tightening. Your room feels emptier. It is, I said, for now. She didn't ask the next question, not out loud. She set the groceries down, then looked at me again with the kind of quiet worry that reminded me of her grandfather. Do you need help with anything? Not help, I said, just time. She nodded, accepting the answer even if she didn't fully understand it. When she hugged me goodbye, her arms lingered a heartbeat longer than usual. After she left, I walked back through the hall, the afternoon sun faint across the new rug they'd chosen. My hip ached, but it wasn't the kind that slowed me, more like the kind that reminded me I was still standing. I went back to the iPad, opened the next camera file, and let the footage load. If they thought they'd taken the most valuable things from this home, they were wrong. The real valuables were still right here on the screen, and I was just getting started collecting them. The next clip began with Darla's reflection caught in the hallway mirror, her hair pulled back, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like she owned the floorboards beneath her. I leaned in, volume raised just enough to catch every syllable. Yes, it's absolutely market-ready, she was saying, her tone bright and professional. The layout is perfect for downsizing couples, and the neighborhood, quiet, clean, desirable. Market-ready. She said it like she'd been rehearsing the phrase for weeks. I pressed pause, wrote the words down with the precision I used to reserve for quarterly reports, then hit play again. I'm telling you, she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, we won't get another window like this. Mom's still in recovery and she's talking like she's tired of upkeep, if we list quickly. The rest dissolved into static as she moved out of the microphone's range. A moment later, Neil walked into frame holding my carving tools, Richard's tools, in a cardboard box. If we're gonna list it before the old woman changes her mind, he said with a laugh, we should get on it. I'm not doing all this cleaning for nothing. I paused the footage again. My hand didn't shake, not from anger, not from grief. The steadiness surprised even me. I wrote down the quotes exactly as spoken, noting timestamps to the second, even marking the tonal shift when L dropped his voice at the word old. Accounting didn't leave me, it simply waited for moments like this. It was nearly noon when I composed an email I'd never imagined sending. Officer Tran, I have a hypothetical question. If someone removed property from a home without consent while the owner was incapacitated, what would the appropriate steps be? I attached nothing, I said nothing more, just the quiet statement of a woman who'd spent her entire life using facts instead of theatrics. His reply came 20 minutes later. Ms. Easton, I can come by this afternoon to take a preliminary look. Tran. He arrived at 4, hat tucked under his arm, posture straight but not rigid, respectful. He followed me to the living room and I set the iPad down between us. I didn't speak while the footage played, neither did he. His eyes tracked every movement, Darla's pacing, Neil's carelessness, the dropping of boxes, the casual joking about my home like it was a piece of land up for grabs. When the clip ended, I quietly locked the screen. Tran exhaled once, long and steady. You're not overreacting, he said. This is removal of property without consent, potentially more. I swallowed, nodding. I thought so. If you choose to file formally, he added, this footage will help a lot. I thanked him and he left me with a card and instructions about where to store the recordings. As soon as the door shut behind him, the house returned to its unnerving quiet, only now it didn't feel empty. It felt documented. I sat at the dining table with a blank sheet of paper. No embellishment, no anger, no editorializing, just facts. Dates. Actions. Items. Statements. Impact. By the time I finished, it was 4 pages, clean, concise, irrefutable. I slid the papers into a folder and placed it beside the iPad. Evening light crept across the living room, brushing the cheap chair they'd installed as if trying to make it belong. It didn't. None of this belonged. My phone buzzed again, another message from Neil. I didn't open it. Instead, I looked toward the bookshelf camera, the green light winking steadily. There was still more footage. More voices. More proof they thought would never matter. I reached for the iPad once more. And this time, I was ready to hear everything. Nadine came back 2 days later with a stack of folders under her arm and a look that told me she'd been thinking about my case long after she'd left my house. She set her materials on the dining table, then glanced toward the camera above the bookshelf, the same camera that had already become my silent witness. Are you ready? She asked. I've been ready for years, I said. The truth was quieter than anger, steadier than fear. It was the realization that love on its own shouldn't excuse theft, and blood shouldn't protect the ones who cut deepest. Nadine opened the first folder and slid a draft toward me. This is the updated estate plan, everything we discussed, including the removals. I read the first page carefully. There it was, written in clean legal language. Neil Easton removed. Darla Easton removed. Not temporarily, not pending review. Irrevocably removed. I let my finger trace the line once. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It felt like setting a heavy stone down after carrying it too long. In clear, I asked. Nadine pulled the second folder forward. Her trust is separate and discreet. No one will know it exists unless she's the one receiving it. I skimmed the terms: education, honesty clauses, protections against outside interference. It wasn't just money, it was a future, structured and safe, something her parents had never offered her. She'll do well with this, I said softly. I believe she will, Nadine replied, and she'll know you trusted her. Next came the clause Nadine had suggested, sharp, elegant, and merciful only to the deserving. No notification upon death for named removed parties. In other words, when my time came, they would not be called, informed, or invited. No dramatic scenes, no last-minute pleas, no chance to rewrite a story they'd already ruined. I initialed the margin, my pen steady. Nadine turned to the final document, my home. This establishes the senior living trust. They can't sell, transfer, or claim any part of the property without your direct signature. So even if they try, I began. They can't, she finished, legally impossible. I breathed out slow and measured. It was the first breath in days that didn't catch. When everything was signed, Nadine handed me a sealed envelope. This is the recording consent form, she said. You mentioned wanting to leave a statement. I nodded, something for Claire, something she'll understand when she's older. We set up my phone on the mantel, angled so the room looked whole even though it still was. I sat in the new chair they'd chosen for me, its unforgiving cushion stiff beneath me, and looked directly into the lens. I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice. I simply spoke about family, about truth, about the difference between love and obligation, about Richard, about the importance of choosing the people you trust even when they share your blood. When I finished, Nadine stopped the recording and placed the file on a secure drive. She handed me one copy, she kept the other. It will only be opened when you're gone, she said. Good, I replied. I don't want it used as leverage, just clarity. Before she packed up, I pulled out a small handwritten letter and slid it across the table. The envelope was simple, unadorned, marked only with my signature. If they sue, I said, this is my side, make it public. Nadine didn't ask what was inside. She didn't need to. She tucked it into her case with the quiet finality of someone sealing a vault. When the door closed behind her, the house fell still again, but it wasn't the empty kind of stillness anymore. It was purposeful, decided. The sun dipped behind the maple tree out front, throwing long shadows through the living room. My iPad rested on the table, the next video thumbnail waiting. I stared at it, the weight of my rewritten legacy settling around me like new armor. If this was the beginning of the end of something, it was also the beginning of something else entirely. And I knew exactly whose voices I was about to listen to next. The certified mail receipts arrived before noon, 2 crisp confirmations sitting neatly in my inbox, stamped with official time and date. I imagined the moment they were delivered. Neil opening the door in that impatient way of his, Darla hovering behind him, already annoyed by anything that required her signature. I didn't have to imagine long. My phone lit up with an unknown number, Officer Tran. They were served, he said, his tone professional but not cold. No response yet. Thank you, I replied. He hesitated, just a breath. For what it's worth, most people panic when they get a notice like that. I know, I said, I counted on it. After we hung up, I returned to the kitchen where a pot of tea steeped quietly on the counter. Through the window, the neighbor's maple branches bent under the wind, steady, unbroken. I felt strangely the same. Not long after, Claire knocked, a soft, hesitant sound as if she wasn't sure whether today was a good day to visit. I opened the door and she stepped in, shoulders tense, hands fidgeting with her sleeves. Her eyes scanned the room, noticing, as always, more than she said. Nana, she murmured, voice low, I know what they did. I didn't ask how she knew. She was perceptive, but she wasn't clairvoyant. Someone must have said something, or maybe guilt had a way of dripping through the cracks of silence. Either way, she stood there waiting, afraid of hurting me with the truth I already carried. So does the state, I said gently. Her breath caught and she nodded once, understanding more in that moment than most adults twice her age. She hugged me, small, firm, decisive, the kind of hug that said she was choosing sides even if it cost her something. After she left, the peace lasted barely 20 minutes. Then my phone vibrated with a message from Darla. We did everything for you, and this is your thanks. Everything for me. Selling my furniture. Pricing my memories. Planning to list my home. I let the phone rest on the table, screen glowing, accusations sitting there like a bad perfume. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the living room window and looked out at the driveway, the place where they'd once parked without asking, walked in without knocking, and helped themselves to what they believed was already theirs. A storm was coming, one they had no idea they'd created. And I was done protecting them from the weather. The next morning, the air felt sharp enough to sting. Spokane winters have a way of waking you up before you're ready, but I welcomed it. Clarity was a currency I needed more of. I wrapped my coat around me and walked slowly, carefully to Pearl's house 2 streets over. We hadn't spoken in months, not from anger, just life's slow drift. Still, when she opened the door and saw me on her porch, her hand flew to her chest. "Maggie, honey, are you all right?" Her voice cracked in a way that told me she already knew something was wrong. "I'm managing," I said. "May I come in?" She ushered me inside, fussing with the heater, clearing a stack of quilting magazines off the sofa. The familiarity of her living room, the warm colors, the old pine scent of her floors made my throat tighten. It felt like stepping into a place that remembered me. "I assumed you were resting from surgery," Pearl said, sitting beside me, but then I heard some things. I let her take her time. She always had been careful with her words. Finally, she exhaled and looked at me with soft, tired eyes. "I saw Darla twice the week you were in the hospital. She was moving boxes in and out of your house. I thought maybe you asked her to tidy up or organize something, but it didn't feel right." My chest tightened, not with sadness but with vindication. Someone else had seen it, someone with no agenda. "I didn't know what to say," Pearl went on. "I didn't want to assume the worst, but I knew it wasn't right." I reached over and placed my hand on hers. "Thank you for telling me." She swallowed. "Maggie, I should have said something sooner." "No," I said gently. "The people who should have said something were the ones inside my house." Silence settled between us, soft, heavy, honest. After a moment, I pulled a small folder from my bag. "Pearl, I need to ask something important. Would you be willing to submit a witness statement, just what you saw, nothing more?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Of course I will." Not fear, not uncertainty, just loyalty. As I left her house, a few neighbors waved to me, longer waves than usual, ones that lingered. Someone across the street nodded with quiet sympathy. Word had begun to spread, it seemed like smoke drifting under doorframes. By afternoon, I felt that shift clearly. A woman from the community center sent a casserole. Another neighbor offered help with yard work. People weren't asking questions, they were sending signals. Neil and Darla, who relied on public perception more than they ever admitted, were beginning to feel the edges closing in. I could feel it from miles away, like pressure changing before a storm. Later that day, I heard Claire's quick footsteps on the porch before the knock came. When I opened the door, she held up a small black hard drive. "I thought you might need this," she said. We sat together at the dining table, connecting the drive to the laptop. She helped me label each clip by date and location, sorting them into folders with the same precision I used in my old office. Claire worked quietly, efficiently, her brows furrowed, her fingers swift on the keyboard. "You're good at this," I told her. She shrugged, but a small smile tugged her lips. "Mom and Uncle Neil hate when I'm organized. They say it means I'm planning for trouble." "Maybe it means you're prepared," I said. Her smile faded. She looked at the screen filled with video files and whispered, "They shouldn't have done this to you." I clicked another file open. "No," I said softly, "they shouldn't have." When she left that evening, the house felt different again, not lonely, not hollow. It felt fortified. Between Pearl's testimony, the footage, and Claire's quiet strength at my side, the truth was no longer just my burden to carry. And as I shut down the computer, a new notification flashed across the screen, an email from the county court. Hearing date scheduled. The real confrontation was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be walking in alone. They came without knocking. Not a courtesy tap, not a pause, just the jangle of my storm door and the hurried shuffle of shoes crossing my threshold, like they still believed this house opened itself for them. I was in the living room, sorting the last of the footage folders Claire and I had organized the night before. When I looked up, Darla was already halfway across the rug, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with a kind of desperate confidence. Neil lingered behind her, jaw tight, trying to look calm and failing. "We need to talk," Darla said, hands clasped together like she was about to deliver a prayer. A real family conversation. Family. That word had grown foreign in their mouths. I didn't stand, I didn't greet them. I simply gestured to the sofa, the new one they'd chosen, the one that creaked even under the weight of their intentions. They sat side by side but not together, stiff in a way that told me they'd rehearsed this. Darla leaned forward. "Mom, this lawsuit, this whole thing, you're being irrational. We thought you might not be coming back after the surgery. We were trying to help, to make things easier for you." Neil nodded, adding, "It wasn't theft, it was just proactive decision-making." I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't defend myself. I picked up my phone, unlocked it with one tap, and placed it gently on the coffee table between us. The screen glowed and I pressed a single button. The room filled with their voices, familiar, unmistakable, recorded clearly from the camera above the bookshelf. "Neil, that credenza's worth something, she won't even notice it's gone." "Darla, we should list the place before she changes her mind." "Neil, it's not like she'll be around forever." The silence afterward was thick enough to touch. Darla's face drained of color. A hand flew to her throat, fingers curling around the base of her necklace like she needed to hold onto something real. Neil's eyes narrowed, not with guilt but with the dawning realization that control had shifted permanently, irreversibly. "You recorded us," Darla whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. Shock, not remorse. I met her gaze, not angry, not triumphant, just steady, the way a person looks after finally seeing the truth clearly without distortion. "This house has had cameras for years," I said. "Your father insisted on it after his diagnosis, you both knew that." Neil shifted, opening his mouth to argue, to deny, to reshape the past into something kinder to himself. But the recording was still playing, looping softly from the speakers. His own voice betrayed him with every second. I tapped the phone again, stopping the audio. The quiet that followed felt like the eye of a storm, brief, suspended, trembling. "You're twisting this," Neil snapped, leaning forward. "You're making us into criminals." I let out a slow breath. "You made yourselves into what you chose to be." Darla stood abruptly, her purse sliding off her lap and hitting the floor with a dull thud. She didn't pick it up. Her hands were shaking too much. "I can't," she sputtered. "I won't stay here and be attacked." "You walked in," I reminded her gently, "uninvited." She stared at me, eyes glassy, as if waiting for me to recant, to soften, to pull her back into the version of motherhood she preferred, the one where I swallowed truth and called it love. But I didn't. Neil grabbed her purse off the floor and tossed it to her. "Let's go," he muttered. They were halfway to the door when I spoke again, my voice calm as winter air. "The hearing date is set." Neither turned around, but their steps faltered, just a fraction, just enough. They left without another word, the slam of the door echoing through the house like a final statement. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet settle back in, heavier now but steadier too. My phone screen dimmed on the table, the paused video still showing Darla's back as she'd walked through my living room, taking what wasn't hers. Outside, their car engine sputtered to life, revved too hard, then faded down the street. I exhaled, slow and deliberate. Because now there was no going back, and they finally knew it. The morning of the hearing arrived colder than the others, a brittle, metallic cold that settled into my bones as I stepped out of the car. Nadine walked beside me, her tote bag tucked under one arm, her expression composed in that calm, deliberate way only seasoned attorneys can manage. The Spokane County Small Claims Building wasn't grand, just a squat brick structure with faded parking lines and a flag snapping in the wind. But as I pushed open the door, it felt like walking into a place where truth might finally weigh more than excuses. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. A clerk checked us in, stamped a form, and told us to wait outside courtroom 3B. Nadine sat beside me, crossing her legs, FL. Ipping through the organized tabs she'd arranged, footage summaries, inventory lists, witness statements. The meticulousness comforted me. But what struck me most was the emptiness of the hallway. No familiar voices. No hurried whispers. No attempt at reconciliation or confrontation. Just silence. 10 minutes before the hearing, Nadine closed her folder. They're not here. I know, I said quietly. I didn't expect them. When the bailiff opened the door, we stood and walked into the small courtroom. The judge, a woman with gray-streaked hair and a no-nonsense posture, nodded for us to take our places. A scattering of people waited for their own cases, but the row behind us remained empty. Are the defendants present? She asked without looking up. No one answered. She scanned the room once, then glanced down at her docket. Noted, will proceed. Nadine nudged the thumb drive across the table. I passed her the folder containing Pearl's notarized statement. Everything in my hands had been touched, sorted, recorded, proof more diligent than anything my children had ever bothered to be. The judge clicked through the footage silently, jaw tightening when Neil tossed aside my album, brows pinching when Darla described the house as market-ready. She read Pearl's statement next, then the inventory with Walter's valuations. The sound of her pen tapping lightly against her pad echoed through the room, steady, methodical. Mrs. Easton, she said, finally lifting her eyes to me, is there anything you would like to add? I stood slowly, my hip reminding me of its scar but not slowing me down. I was stolen from, I said, voice clear, even by my own children. Nothing more, nothing less. Just the truth. The judge gave a single, decisive nod. I've reviewed the evidence thoroughly. In the absence of the defendants and given the overwhelming documentation, judgment is granted in favor of the plaintiff for the full amount requested, plus court costs. Her gavel hit the block, one clean strike. And just like that, something inside me loosened, not triumph, not even satisfaction, just the release of breath I'd been holding for far too long. Outside the courtroom, Nadine placed the court order into my hands. The paper felt heavier than it looked, like closure in physical form. You did well, she said. I told the truth, I replied. That's not always the easy part, she said softly. We stepped out into the cold again. The sky had lightened, the clouds breaking just enough for a thin ray of sun to slip through. I let myself stand there, air crisp in my lungs, the order folded neatly in my coat pocket. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just breathed. And somewhere in the widening distance between us, I wondered if Neil and Darla had finally realized that this time, this loss, they'd brought entirely on themselves. Because now the court had spoken. And the next steps were no longer in my hands alone. The court order sat on my kitchen table for nearly an hour before I touched it again. Not because I doubted it or because I needed time to process it, but because I knew exactly what came next and I wanted to take my time doing it. Justice may be quiet in court, but outside it needed light. I opened my laptop, logged into the small neighborhood community group I'd been part of for years, and clicked Create Post. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, then I began to type. While I was healing, they were taking. Not an accusation, not a rant, a story. A short, clear account of what happened while I was in the hospital recovering from surgery. I didn't mention names or relationships, only facts, that someone with keys had removed furniture, sold items without consent, and discussed listing my home. That evidence existed, that the court had ruled. I attached 3 images. A redacted still from the footage, only silhouettes and timestamp visible. A blurred receipt from Walter's shop proving the sale. A photo of my empty living room from the day I returned home. No anger, no embellishment. Just truth presented gently, respectfully, because truth didn't need dramatics to be believed. I clicked post. It took 5 minutes. 5 before the comments began. This is elder abuse. I'm so sorry, Maggie. If you need help replacing anything, let us know. This happens more than people realize. And then Walter himself. She's telling the truth. I confirmed the items were brought in without her permission. His comment acted like a match dropped into dry pine needles. Replies multiplied, sympathy swelling alongside indignation. Neighbors who rarely spoke up began describing their own experiences with caretakers or relatives who had overstepped. a few thanked me for sharing. I wasn't looking for applause, I wasn't looking for pity. But I was looking for witnesses, and now I had them. By late afternoon, the post had spread into a regional group. Someone messaged me privately asking if I wanted to speak at a community meeting on elder rights. I told them I'd think about it. The whole time, I said nothing publicly beyond the post itself. But the silence didn't last long. Near dusk, as I was steeping tea, my phone rang, Claire's name flashing on the screen. She didn't even say hello. "Nana," she said breathlessly, "Uncle Neil just called me, he's furious." I could hear the tremor of disbelief in her voice, as if she still couldn't fathom how quickly truth rattled people who depended on secrecy. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said you're humiliating them," she replied, "that you made them look like monsters." I let out a slow breath, leaning one hand on the counter. "And what did you tell him?" Her answer came without hesitation. "I told him, no, you did that yourselves." For a moment, neither of us spoke, but the stillness felt charged like a wire humming after a storm. Claire added softly, "They know the post is about them, even without the names." "Guilt has a way of recognizing its own reflection," I murmured. She exhaled a shaky laugh. "They're panicking." I didn't celebrate that, I didn't need to. Panic was simply the echo of consequence hitting people who'd never imagined they'd face any. "Thank you, Claire," I said. "For what?" "For seeing things clearly." After we hung up, I opened the community page again. The post had doubled in comments, a tide I hadn't expected but now understood fully. People weren't reacting to my story, they were reacting to the possibility it could be theirs. And somewhere, miles away, I imagined Neil pacing, Darla wringing her hands, both trying to figure out how a woman they underestimated had outmaneuvered them so completely. But this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about embarrassment. It was about truth being seen. And the truth tends to shine brightest when people try hardest to hide from it. As I closed my laptop, a new notification buzzed on my phone, a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it, a quiet certainty forming in my chest. This wasn't over. The fallout began quietly, always behind the curtain, exactly the way Neil and Darla preferred to operate. But quiet doesn't mean harmless. Quiet is where reputations try to reshape themselves. The first ripple came through a message request on my phone. A woman named Teresa, someone I'd baked cookies with for PTA events decades ago, forwarded a screenshot with a brief note. "Maggie, I thought you should see this." The screenshot was from Darla. "Mom's not well, she's confused, we're doing our best but she's turning against us. Please don't believe everything she's saying." A soft sigh left my chest, not out of hurt, not even out of surprise, just recognition. Of course Darla would resort to this. She'd always been quick to rewrite reality when it served her better. I added the screenshot to a folder on my laptop labeled Character Evidence, tucked neatly beside footage and inventory records. No commentary. No anger. Just documentation. The truth didn't require embellishment. Before noon, another message arrived, this time from Henry at the community center. He forwarded a different message from Darla, nearly identical but with a new twist. "She's lashing out because she's lonely, we didn't want to embarrass her." I clicked save, then moved on with my morning. By mid-afternoon, the next tremor hit Neil. Or rather, the digital trail he was suddenly trying and failing to erase. Claire texted me a link, followed by a brief. "He's deleting everything." I opened the link to one of Neil's old Yelp reviews of a consignment shop 2 years old. His review mentioned selling Mom's antique pieces with the casual arrogance of someone who thought he'd never need to retract a word. But the review was cached. Archived. Saved forever in the places the internet never forgets. I saved screenshots, timestamp, URL, everything, then added it to the folder. Piece by piece, the narrative they were scrambling to build dissolved under the weight of the one they'd already written. Later that day, Nadine arrived to review the post-hearing materials. I handed her the flash drive, the printouts, the forwarded messages, the screenshots. She flipped through each page, her expression sharpening with every line. Let them drown in what they said, I murmured. For the first time since this began, Nadine allowed herself a tight, satisfied smile. You're giving them enough rope, she said softly, and they're doing the tying. She packed everything neatly into her case and left, her heels tapping like a metronome of inevitability. I had just settled into my reading chair when my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something nudged me. Mrs. Easton? A woman asked when I answered. This is Sarah Wilburn from the Spokane Ledger. I'm reaching out because a story circulating online about elder financial abuse seems to reference an active court case. We'd like to speak with you. I closed my eyes for a moment. NT letting the weight of that settle. Public interest. Not gossip. Not rumor. A story. What would you like from me? I asked. An interview, if you're willing, she said. Your post has opened a lot of conversations. This could help people. I looked around my living room, the new furniture, the empty spaces where memory used to sit, the quiet that now felt like reclamation rather than loss. No interview, I said gently. This isn't about attention. A pause, I understand. But I added, I'll send you public record. Public record. The court ruling and a few photos, nothing private, nothing inflammatory. Her tone warmed instantly. Thank you, Mrs. Easton, truly. After the call, I emailed her the ruling, the unedited images, and a short note. Feel free to use anything that belongs to the public. Truth doesn't require permission. When I hit send, a calm washed over me, not victory, not relief, something quieter, something sturdier. Outside, the street lamps flickered on one by one, lighting the neighborhood in soft gold. And somewhere, I imagined Darla refreshing her phone, frantic, watching the story slip further from her grip. Truth is loud when it finally climbs out of silence. My phone buzzed again, another message, unknown number. This time, the preview alone made my breath hitch. Is this about us? The storm wasn't done. The message, is this about us, still sat unanswered on my phone the next morning, but I didn't touch it. I didn't even open it. There was nothing left to say to people who only spoke when cornered. Instead, I focused on the one thing that had been quietly whispering for my attention. My home. My space. The place they'd tried to hollow out. I started with the living room. For weeks, every time I passed through it, the mismatched furniture they'd dumped in my house felt like an intrusion, like their hands were still on the doorknobs, their voices still in the walls. So I opened my notebook, grabbed my coat, and went out into Spokane with a plan. Every new piece I bought came with a receipt in my name, crisp, printed, filed immediately in a fresh binder labeled Reclamation. A soft blue loveseat with curved arms, a warm, amber floor lamp that glowed like candlelight. A thick woven rug whose colors reminded me of the autumns Richard and I used to drive through. I created a reading nook near the window, angled so the morning sun could spill across the pages of whatever book I grabbed. A small side table held Richard's favorite coaster, the one they hadn't touched, the single survivor from a life they thought they could inventory without conscience. Piece by piece, the house softened, brightened, came back into its shape. When I returned home from the furniture store one afternoon, I opened the little metal key box hanging near the pantry, the same one Neil always felt entitled to rummage through. I removed every spare key except the one for Claire and replaced the combination with a new code. The click of that lock closing felt final in a way the courtroom never did. Then I sat with my phone, opening the emergency contact list with deliberate slowness. I deleted Neil, deleted Darla. Left the space blank for a moment. Then added Claire. And Officer Tran. Two people who had shown up for me for no benefit of their own. Later that week, Claire came over to help me hang the last painting, one I'd chosen on my own, not inherited, not bought for me, a vibrant landscape of pine trees reflected in still water. She held the frame while I stepped back to check the height. When she saw the look on my face, the relief, the small tremor of recognition, she whispered, "It's yours again, Nana." And for the first time since coming home from the hospital, I felt that truth settle into the room like light. It was mine again. After she left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the dining table with a fresh notebook, its cover a simple linen gray. I wrote the title at the top of the first page. Inventory: what they took and what I reclaimed. Not for publication, not for the community group, not even for Claire. It was for me. A record of the pieces of my life, physical, emotional, historical, that had been stolen and returned, broken and repaired, silenced and finally spoken aloud. By evening, I'd already filled 3 pages, details, dates, reflections, a ledger of harm and healing. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely, not anymore. As I stood to turn off the lamp, something caught my attention out the front window, headlights slowing at the edge of my driveway, a car idling. I stepped closer, heart steady, not fearful, just aware. The headlights lingered. Then slowly the car pulled away. I didn't need to see the driver to know. They could circle the house all they wanted. But they would never step inside again. The headlights that lingered in front of my house the night before faded into memory by morning, replaced by something steadier: resolution. The kind you don't announce. The kin. DU sign. Nadine arrived just after 9, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm and a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. She set the folder on my dining table, my new dining table, and slid the final estate documents toward me. "This is it," she said, "the last amendment. Once this is filed, everything becomes irrevocable." I opened the folder. Page 1, Neil Easton removed. Page 2, Darla Easton removed. Each line echoed the decision that had been forming in me for years, long before the furniture disappeared, long before the cameras captured their intentions. But the next page made my throat tighten. Claire Easton, sole heir and executor. Not because she shared blood with me, but because she shared character. Trust can't be inherited, it has to be earned. She had earned every line of this. I initialed each page, my signature slow but unwavering. Nadine gathered the documents carefully, as if holding something fragile and powerful all at once. "I'll file it this afternoon," she said. "After today, there's nothing left for them to contest." "Good," I whispered. "Let what's done stay done." When she left, the house felt warm again, not from the heater but from the absence of fear, the absence of intrusion. Later that afternoon, standing at my kitchen counter, I opened my checkbook and wrote a donation to the Spokane Senior Legal Support Fund, an organization Richard always admired but never had the chance to support the way he wanted. I filled in the note line. "In memory of Richard Easton, protector of what matters." Giving felt lighter than taking ever had. That evening, I hosted a small dinner, nothing elaborate, just soup, bread, and warmth. Pearl arrived first with a pie, nervous she'd burned the edges, she hadn't. Walter came with a bottle of wine and a shy smile, as if uncertain he belonged at my table. Officer Tran stepped inside quietly, his polite nod as solid as ever. And my Claire brought a small sealed envelope. We ate together in the living room I had rebuilt piece by piece. The room wasn't expensive, wasn't polished, but it was mine again. It held the right people, the kind who showed up for reasons other than gain. After dinner, Claire cleared her throat and opened the envelope. "I wrote something," she said softly. "I hope you don't mind." She unfolded a single page and began to read. "To the one who watched over all of us, even when we didn't deserve it. To the one who built a home that felt like safety, and taught me that truth doesn't need force, only light. Thank you for choosing me. The way others forgot to." Her voice wavered on the last line. Mine did too, quietly, inside the part of me I rarely let anyone see. We sat together long after the food cooled, talking about memories, not the ones that were taken, but the ones worth keeping. When the night ended and the door finally closed behind them, my living room glowed in the soft lamplight. Whole, not by monetary value, not by matching sets or polished antiques, but by intention. By the people who would never try to take from it. I stood there letting the warmth settle over me when my phone buzzed from the counter. Another message. A familiar number. I didn't reach for it. Because tonight, for the first time in a long time, the only legacy that mattered was the one I'd rewritten myself. And this chapter, this home, belonged solely to me. In the days after the dinner, the house felt different, not just restored but steadied, like a place finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I moved through it slowly, deliberately, touching corners I hadn't touched in months, letting the quiet feel earned rather than imposed. One morning, after washing the breakfast dishes, I carried the small external hard drive, black, unmarked, weighty, into my study. It held everything: the footage, the timestamps, the audio, the cataloged inventory. Proof of what they'd done, captured in angles and seconds and shadows they never thought would matter. I plugged it into my computer long enough to back up the entire archive to a private cloud Richard and I set up years ago, back when he insisted on redundancy for everything that mattered. When the final upload bar hit 100%, I ejected the drive, walked to my bedroom, and placed it inside the fireproof safe at the back of my closet. The latch clicked shut with a soft, final certainty. Not because I needed the evidence anymore, but because I wanted it there, quiet, protected, untouched. Afterward, I opened my journal, now thick with pages, and wrote my last entry on the matter. I will never have to prove anything to them again. The words felt less like closure and more like release, a gentle loosening of something I'd carried for too long. In the living room, the new bookshelf arrived, a wide, sturdy walnut piece that fit perfectly along the far wall. As I arranged books and framed photos, I paused at one particular item, a single still image from the footage, the moment they carry. My dining set through the door, their silhouettes outlined in afternoon light. I'd blurred their faces not to protect them, but to protect myself from remembering them that way forever. I framed it and placed it on the top shelf. Not as a wound. As a marker. A quiet reminder of a boundary reclaimed. Below it, tucked in a leather folio, lay the official court judgment. No one else had touched it. No one else needed to. It wasn't a trophy, it was a document, a record of the truth standing where their excuses once lived. A week later, I found myself sitting in the community center across from a woman named Joyce, gray-haired, soft-spoken, terrified in the way people become when their lives start slipping beyond their control. Her nephew had taken her car without permission. Her checks had begun to go missing. I showed her how to organize her statements, how to document conversations, how to file quietly without alerting the people who believed she had no voice left. Not just as guidance. A quiet legacy, one case at a time. When I returned home that afternoon, Claire was waiting on the porch, her cheeks pink from the cold. She followed me inside, noticing the new bookshelf immediately, the framed still, the folio below it. "You've rebuilt everything," she said softly. "Not everything," I corrected, "just what mattered." She came to stand beside me, eyes on the framed image, then shifted her gaze to mine. "You know," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you didn't get justice." I raised an eyebrow. She smiled faintly. "You built it." Her words settled deep, warm, anchoring. Maybe she was right. Justice wasn't something delivered to me, it was something I constructed piece by piece, document by document, choice by choice. And now it stood around me, not in courts or files or posts, but in a home that felt whole again. That evening, after Claire left, I turned off the lights one by one, the house dimming into a soft twilight. When I reached the living room, I lingered, looking at the shelves, the framed still, the lamp casting gold over the rug. The doorbell rang. A single sharp chime. Unexpected. Unscheduled. I stood perfectly still, breath caught halfway between memory and instinct. Because I knew deep down I wasn't finished reclaiming everything just yet. 1 year later, I woke to sunlight warming the edge of my quilt, bright and unfiltered through the window I'd finally stopped covering with heavy drapes. The house was quiet in the best way, no tension in the floorboards, no shadows where memory used to linger, just morning. I slipped into my slippers, padded to the kitchen, and started a pot of coffee. The soft crackle of jazz drifted through the speakers, Chet Baker, warm and easy, the kind of music Richard used to hum while reading the paper. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, settling into the corners of a home that had been rebuilt piece by piece, not through money but intention. Every drawer organized, every chair chosen, every wall carrying something that belonged to me and only me. As the first sip warmed my chest, I walked through the house slowly, taking in the space with a familiarity that felt earned. My living room looked nothing like the one I came home to after the hospital. The blue love seat, the amber lamp, the reading nook with its stack of books. The framed still from the footage, silent, blurred, a reminder rather than a wound. Every corner was mine again. Not reclaimed. Restored. Just after 10, Claire arrived, her knock light and quick, her smile brighter than the morning sun. She stepped inside and practically vibrated with the kind of joy you can't hide. "Nana," she said, breathless, "I got in, full ride, grad school." The truth of it hit me like something physical, something warm and proud and overwhelming. My eyes prickled before I could stop them. She laughed softly and hugged me, and I held her a little longer than usual. "You did that," she whispered against my shoulder. "You believed in me." I shook my head when she pulled back. "No, sweetheart, you did that, I just watched." As she walked down the hallway, admiring the new pictures I'd hung, her eyes caught on the small pewter plaque mounted on the wall. She ran her fingers across the engraving. "Protected. Recorded. Reclaimed." She smiled, and I knew she understood all three words. After she left for her celebratory lunch with friends, I stepped out onto the front porch. The wood was warm under my feet, the cat, Oliver, curling instantly around my ankle before settling beside my chair. I opened my book, let the breeze rustle its pages, and breathed in the scent of pine drifting from the yard. Life felt quieter now. Not empty quiet. Good quiet. Midway through a chapter, a car slowed in front of my house. I didn't look up at first. The engine idled for a beat longer than necessary. When I finally glanced toward the street, the sun caught the windshield just right to make the driver's face visible. Neil. Older than he'd out. Ooked a year ago, more tired, more hollow, his hands tight on the wheel, his eyes flicking from me to the home behind me, the home he once believed was already his. He didn't wave. He didn't park. He didn't roll down the window. He just kept driving. Slow. Silent. Gone. Oliver stretched, pressing his warm body against my leg as if to anchor me back into the present. I closed my book softly, let the sun settle on my shoulders, and exhaled. The porch creaked, the breeze shifted, the world felt steady. And in the quiet, certain space of the life I'd rebuilt, one truth finally rose without bitterness, without sting, just clarity. They sold the furniture. I sold the fantasy.